The dusty winds of Organdale village always carried stories, but none louder than those whispered about Madam Ajoke, the widow who lived at the edge of the town, just before the land dipped into the silent forest. Her compound was silent, her walls high, her gate always shut. Children crossed to the other side of the road when passing her house, and adults muttered prayers when her name came up. But what made her house even more unsettling were the 3 wooden coffins lined side by side beneath the mango tree in her front yard. They weren't hidden, they were proudly displayed, freshly varnished and handcrafted with symbols no one recognized. Every market day, curious strangers would gather, staring at the coffins, only to be chased off by a terrifying shout from inside her compound. "Go and buy your own burial box," she would bellow, and people always ran. Many claimed she was mad. Others were certain she was a witch who ate her husbands. All 3 of them had died under strange circumstances, and some believed she was simply waiting for death. But only a few suspected the truth, that Madam Ajoke was guarding a secret larger than death itself. It was during a Harmattan morning that a man arrived in the village. Tall, lean, with tribal marks across his face and a single scar running from his ear to the base of his neck. He came with nothing but a brown envelope tucked under his arm, and a strange intensity in his eyes. He asked no questions, but made his way straight to Madam Ajoke's gate. The villagers watched in disbelief as he knocked boldly. No one had done that in years. Ajoke opened the gate without speaking. She stared at the man for a long time, then without a word, stepped aside and let him in. That night, the entire village buzzed with speculation. Some said he was her long-lost son. Others claimed he was a government official sent to arrest her for a ritual she committed decades ago. But the truth would be darker and more haunting than anyone imagined. At midnight, a scream pierced the village air, not just any scream, but one that clawed through the silence like a dying animal. It came from Madam Ajoke's house. Lights flicked on across the village. People gathered near her gate, too afraid to enter, but too curious to leave. After a few minutes, silence returned. But the next morning, the gate remained shut, and the coffins had been moved. One was missing. No one saw Madam Ajoke, no one saw the scarred man. Only the birds circling above her compound gave a hint that something terrible had happened. By noon the next day, word had spread beyond Organdale to neighboring towns. "Madam Ajoke's coffin has been used." That's what they whispered in hushed voices. The village chief, an aging man named Chief Orizania, summoned the community elders for an emergency meeting. He sent his guards to Ajoke's home, but they returned with blank faces and trembling hands. The gate was still locked. The compound was silent, but what they saw through a crack in the wall chilled them. A large, freshly dug hole under the mango tree where the missing coffin had been. Inside that open pit was something wrapped in white cloth, not moving, not breathing. A burial done quietly, and yet no one saw a body. No one heard digging. Who had been buried, and why in such secrecy? 3 days passed. Then suddenly, Madam Ajoke appeared in the market. She was wrapped in deep indigo lace, walking slowly, carrying a walking stick. Her face, though aged, wore no signs of sorrow, only deep fatigue. She bought dry fish, cola nuts, and palm oil, and as villagers cleared out of her way, she stopped in front of the town well, turned to the crowd and said, "Every soul will return to the earth. Some return clean, some return soaked in secrets. When I return, do not mourn me. Dig carefully." Then she walked away. Children cried. Adults watched in stunned silence. For years, they'd feared her. Now, they feared the truth she carried even more. The scarred man had left something behind the brown envelope. A young boy who swept the church compound found it tucked behind the altar 2 days after Ajoke's market visit. He handed it to the pastor. Inside were old photographs, letters, and one torn document that read, "Confidential. State Testimony. Organdale Massacre Survivor, 1978. The pastor, overwhelmed, called Chief or Rosania. As they read through the content, the color drained from their faces. Madam Ajoke wasn't just a widow. She was the only surviving witness of a military atrocity buried deep in the country's violent history, one that killed her husband, her 2 sons, and her brother, whose remains were never found. She had built 3 coffins, one for each of them. She waited 40 years to find what was left of them, and she did. After days of tension, the local government intervened. With Ajoke's reluctant approval, they exhumed the remaining 2 coffins. Inside the first was a set of bones, a man, identified by the military dog tag still hanging around the ribcage. Her husband. The second held the remains of 2 children, curled beside each other, as if still hugging even in death. Her sons. No longer just a strange old woman, Ajoke became something else. A monument of pain. A woman who waited for decades for justice that never came. A widow who built her own memorial with her hands, under the sun in silence. 2 weeks later, Madam Ajoke died quietly in her sleep. No sickness, no pain, just peace. She had left behind a single note, pinned to her gate. "I have buried my truth. Let no one dig it again." The village mourned like never before. People who once feared her now wept at her gate. The chief ordered her home preserved as a historical site. The 3 coffins now stood not as symbols of madness, but as echoes of history, silence, and strength. She wasn't a witch. She was a widow who refused to forget.